So I would refer to this golden band as like the golden pocket. Whenever Bitcoin goes down there, it's a really good time to buy Bitcoin. And I think the absolute worst case scenario for this year, absolute worst case, I do not think Bitcoin would go below it, would be the...
Everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, I'm joined by Ben Cowan, and we're going to do some Bitcoin dubious speculation. We're sitting at $66,000 per coin. How are you, Ben?
Doing pretty well. Just losing a little sleep recently, but because of the new baby, but doing pretty good other than that.
Well, Uncle Ben, thank you so much for not breaking my heart and doing this interview before my bedtime, because I'm getting pretty tired myself too. I've been up looking at Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We saw...
You should go to bed a little earlier tonight because Bitcoin, Bitcoin will still be there in the morning.
It will. I just hope that it's not like 10% lower. We got the 200 daily moving average retest at a point in the cycle where it's the complete same as March of 2022 and the same as April to May of 2018. I would like to know, how far lower, Ben, does this retest take us? Is it going to be like the QT ending bear market where we see a huge crash? Or is it going to be more like Q4 of midterm year where we just descend to the ultimate low in October?
It's a good question. I mean, I generally think that Bitcoin will go lower. I think we're going to likely be retesting 60K relatively soon. Probably the 200-week moving average, and then maybe like we'll see us go below 60K. I could play out like 2018 where we hold 60K. Back then we held 6K, and then we fell below it in Q4. If it's like 2019, then we just capitulate into June, and maybe that's then it, right? It could be. I think the most likely time frame for a bottom for Bitcoin would be the fourth quarter of the year. But if Bitcoin were to nuke to like 40K or something, I probably wouldn't wait till October to turn bullish on it. But I think as long as we keep kind of just slowly going down, you have to be open-minded to the low being, in Q4 of this year. Yeah, probably in October, but, plus or minus a few months or so, a month or two.
A tweet you posted earlier on this week highlighted that a low could form in June. We're in the month of June. So if we do a low in June, do you expect a pump in the summer before creating that ultimate low, which therefore would mean we diverge away from QT ending bear market and focus more on the 4-year cyclicality?
I think the QT ending bear market chart is the right chart to look at, but I think you have to stretch it out. Okay. So the final crash, I mean, it does look pretty convincing. I'm not going to lie. Like it does track, it looks like it's tracking it pretty well. But also, if you were to look at, like the year to date ROI chart of Bitcoin in 2026 and compare that to the average of prior midterm years, it's kind of tracking that as well. That one also seems like a plausible scenario where we just kind of, if you scroll all the way down.
All the way down. Okay, got you.
No. Yeah, all the way down and click midterm years. Yeah. So
go.
that is kind of showing the general path, I guess. So if we capitulate into June, then that might be the low, right? But if we hold 60K, then we still have to wait until Q4, I think, to figure out where the actual low probably is.
Okay, so in your mind, we actually retake the 60K level created in February, and then we need to be pragmatic on how we react to 60K in order to assume a lower price trajectory. Would that be correct? Before we continue with the interview, guys and girls, this is my 1000th video here on the Crypto Kid channel. In celebration, it only makes sense to reach 1,000 likes, doesn't it? Thank you so much in advance. And if you're curious about more daily Bitcoin technical analysis, fundamental analysis, macroeconomics, and political commentary, then subscribe and follow along my journey. I started this channel when I was 12 and a half to 13 years old, and I've been making content for 4.5 years, and I'm planning on staying here for much longer. Enjoy the rest of the interview and see you on future uploads.
Yeah, and I think there likely will be a rally in July, sort of the July-August timeframe. That's the July-August rally in midterm years is normally the final rally before the actual low.
Final rally.
So yeah, that's sort of it's the final rally. you normally get a few rallies in the bear market. We've already had two, and my guess is we'll get one more. So one more time, one more period where crypto Twitter is dunking on me. Will likely
This time
happen.
is different.
But again, but again, I mean, I would even be willing to pivot on the low if we go if we go way below 60K, then I might even be like, all right, that's good enough for me.
So when you start to buy, essentially, it's going to be when we go below 60, especially if it's in Q4 of this year. Probably start being bullish a few months before. So are you going to buy into that July increase, or will you wait for the final downturn?
I would start buying before that, probably. I mean, if you started buying in the summer of 2022, you were buying Bitcoin at like 20K. I mean, I bought Bitcoin back then, told people it was going to go lower. In the short term, it went up, and people were like, I was an idiot. And then I was like, well, I might be an idiot, but at least I bought and I'm making money. And then later that year, the market nuked like I thought it was, but I lost money because I still bought Bitcoin in the summer. Um, but then a year or two later, it didn't matter because the market was much higher. So yeah, I think the time to accumulate Bitcoin is probably sort of the second half of midterm years, probably after the June low, right? After you set that June low, that's probably when you want to start accumulating. Not to say that it won't go lower, but just to say that you're getting a pretty good entry. Now, again, if the June low is around 60K, um, you might not really see it go that much lower than 60 until Q4. So I think the big test is where does it find a low in June? Is it 60K? Is it 50K? Is it 55K? Like how low does it go? And then from there, I think we'll be able to make a better assessment as to where the actual bottom would be in time. But until we get the June low, it's just it's dubious speculation, right?
Exactly. I'll have you on again after we reclaim 60. I just hope it's not going to be in like 24 hours. That would be a pretty fast
Yeah.
episode, too. But it's upsetting that when you expect prices to go lower, and as an analyst, you share that it's going to go lower probably in the short term. So why should I not see that correction of by 50%, 60%, and buy the same thing cheaper, perhaps even double the amount in comparison to the highest point in the market? And I feel like crypto investors get a little bit too emotional about their investment, and they can't be pragmatic enough to sell, to buy cheaper, or pivot into a different asset class or a different index like the S&P 500, which has rallied for the past consecutive 11 weekly candles in a row. So as a Bitcoin investor, if you had pivoted into stocks, or like you called commodities, in December, you would have made a bunch of extra cash, preserved losses from the crypto market, and now you could have scooped up a bunch more crypto at lower prices. So with that, Ben, for the S&P is a different asset class, as an index in general, representing Wall Street and not Main Streets. Do you still see a correction, a heavy correction occurring in second half of 2026? And do you still believe that that will push Bitcoin to a much further low in Q4?
I think there's a good chance it will. If you look at the S&P, every midterm year, there's normally a correction in the beginning of the year and then a correction at the end of the year. And it's the end of the year correction by the S&P in 2014, 2018, and 2022 that correspond to the actual market cycle bottom for Bitcoin. So I think that I mean, semis have been doing really well. Software has been doing really well. You'll likely see that. You'll likely see that stuff sort of fall back in the back half of the year, which is going to be kind of a scary time. And I think if that happens, it'll send Bitcoin lower, and then people will start to look around and be like, all right, well, where do I want to put my money? And I think one place will be Bitcoin, because it'll be like, well, look, the 4-year cycle played out, and Bitcoin went down in the midterm year when everything else went up. And if the economy is not falling apart by the end of the year, then perhaps Bitcoin can get that catch-up trade. I mean, yes, I mean, I pivoted out of Bitcoin into energy, into manufacturing stocks, commodities, emerging markets, international markets, the stock market, right? I pivoted out of Bitcoin into a lot of that stuff at the end of last year. And so I think the way that I was able to not get emotional about the last counter trend rally is because even with the counter trend rally, Bitcoin was still grossly underperforming the things that I bought instead at the end of last year, right? So, like, even if Bitcoin were to go back up to 90K, so what? Like, it's still underperforming the other markets that have been doing very, very well. And I think a lot of people, what happens and what makes them so emotional is they don't sell Bitcoin at the end of the post halving year, and then they panic sell, like they don't sell it, and then when there's a drop they panic sell, um, and then they end up marking the low, and then the market rallies for a few months, and then they want to blame someone for selling that low, and so they just go blame the person that was saying it was bear market, and then they FOMO back in, and then the market then goes to the next leg down, right? And I mean, we've seen this happen so many times, and for the last 3 or 4 months, I kept saying this thing over and over, and that's that bear markets make fools of both bulls and bears. And I really do believe that, because even in a bear market, it feels like I spend more time seeing people say how much of an idiot I am than saying, all right, well, it played out that way. And one of the reasons is because, like, when Bitcoin drops like it is right now, it just drops so quickly. After you'll spend like 3 months trending up, and then you'll spend like 3 weeks trending down, or and capitulating. So what happens is that it gives the bulls a false sense of security, right? It makes them think that they're right because the market's trending up for so long. It allows people to dunk on the bears for so long, and then the bears only get like a few weeks where they're right. But because it's like a staircase up and an elevator down, you end up taking out those lows. The bears get to celebrate very briefly, and then another low is formed, and then you just start trending back up for another 2 or 3 months.
Mhm. And Ben,
So it's tough.
it's very tough, and I'm just curious on what indicator or what sort of rule are you looking for to decide, all right, the bear market has concluded and the bull has restarted. In our previous interviews, we looked at Bitcoin losing the 50 simple week moving average, and how if Bitcoin had lost that, we would enter into a bear market. And because we topped on apathy, a lot of my audience were saying, Crypto Kid, I think it's time for you to go back to school because we're going higher. And I was like, no, we're losing the 50-week moving average. Every time we have lost it at this stage in the cycle, we go into a bear. So I'm curious, Ben, what do you need to see to confirm that the bull is restarting?
I mean, I think if you throw up my screen here, I think
Mm-hmm.
time is a really important one. Like, this one shows the ROI from the low to the highs, and then out to the next low, and you can see this cycle tops to within 1 week of prior cycles. And if it bottoms around prior cycles, that would put you in October, first half of October. So it's not really that. I mean, you're talking about July, August, September, October, right? It's only 4 months from now. That's not very long. The bear market is 2/3 of the way over, right? Because we're now about 8 months in. Um, and I think if we were to take out the February low, then you would finally get people that have been sort of holding out on calling it a bear market. They would then finally call it a bear market. But the problem is once everyone's in agreement that we're in a bear market, usually the bear market then ends.
It's ending, yeah.
So I do right. So I think time is an important one. There's some other indicators as well that I'd be looking at. Maybe like on-chain risk, wanting to see that kind of come back down near the 0.1 risk level. I'd be looking at some of the charts, like the supply of Bitcoin in profit or loss. Like, normally the market cycle bottom occurs after these things cross, and that hasn't happened yet. Like, this is a really aesthetically pleasing chart, I think, to look at, because it really clearly shows you the cadence of each cycle, and how you bottom out, you top out, and every cycle there's a reason, there's a narrative, and then Bitcoin just repeats itself anyways. So to me, I think you got to look at stuff like this. I could look at the risk metrics that we have, which I mentioned. But really, I mean, I think a lot of it is just time. We have to go through this time-based capitulation where the people who are all bulled up at the end of 2025 have to give up. And after they give up, then we start to go back up. And usually it's the people that are so adamantly against being in a bear market, then they will get the memo, but they'll get it so late in the bear market, they'll pivot, and then they'll stay bearish into the bull market,
And then
right?
miss
And so
out
then,
on
then
the
they get
buying.
wrecked. Right. So then they get wrecked in both directions, right? They're the bull in a bear market, and then they're a bear in a bull market. And so that's what we want to avoid, is that it's really dangerous to be a bear, right? It really is, because a lot of times markets do trend higher. But if you're going to be a bear in Bitcoin, the best time to do it is Q4, sometime Q4, the post halving year. Just stay a bear for 1 year, ignore all the headlines, ignore all the narratives, all that stuff, and then just start buying a year later, And I mean, it I think it's so simple that it makes people want to overcomplicate it and make them think that, oh, well, it has to be more complicated than this. And then it just never is, right? It's just the same thing over and over again.
Ben, you introduced a new model on your channel that you haven't spoken before, and it's a derivative, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's a derivative of the quantile model, and you've sort of changed the curvature so it becomes more realistic rather than optimistic. The bottom half, or the lower band, is pretty much the same, but the upper band, it just compresses along with the lower band. So with that curvature
Right.
model, would you mind explaining that to us and what it means for, well, super cycle, I guess?
So if you show my screen, so first of all, I don't think we're getting a super cycle, but if you
At
show my
all?
screen, this, no,
Ever?
this, I feel like I'm like telling a kid Santa Claus isn't real or something.
Are you 100%
uh,
sure? I mean, that's
uh,
that's why I got into this space, Ben.
um, so okay, so the asymmetry is something I noticed in 2020. Okay,
Mhm.
and so I noticed it 6 years ago. What I'm mad about is I didn't notice it before, because I ran the statistics and all the data, and it was noticeable in the data as early as like 2014. You could have already seen the asymmetry. I didn't notice it until 2020 when I put out this model here. And you can visually see the asymmetry, because you can tell that the sort of the width between the bands is compressing, right, as time goes on. So you can see the asymmetry there already. Now, when I created this, it was fit to data through about right here. Okay. So it did a pretty good job. We did technically hit the upper regression band at the 2021 peak, and we've spent a lot of our time kind of in this regression band down here. But the issue is that, you know every cycle you fit the data to, it always is a little over optimistic. So you really do want to refit it every cycle so that you get the best chance of predicting the next top. Because if you don't, then what happens is in your regression bands end up being way too optimistic. Okay. So
Like the
as an
stock to
example,
flow, I would say.
right, like as an example, if you only fit the first two peaks, then it would probably tell you that the 2017 peak should have been a lot higher, right? If you only fit those two. But if you fit those two and the third one, it might get, it slowly converges to like where those tops theoretically should be. So the point was, all right, let me because in this video, or sorry, on this indicator, I was essentially fitting the data to the Q1 and Q99. Now Q1 basically means that it's the price of Bitcoin only spends 1% of its time below Q1. Okay, that doesn't mean it doesn't go below Q1. It just means it only spends 1% of the time below it. This is basically that line. And then this one up here is basically the Q99, meaning we only spend about 1% of our time above the 99th percentile. So I created that idea back in 2020,
When I
but I
was
was looking
12.
at it like, all right, it's probably time to what?
I was 12 then.
Yeah,
That's why I wasn't watching.
right.
Otherwise, I would have watched you.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what else you were doing. I mean, what else would you
I
do when you're 12? I've
apologize.
been
I
watching.
should have watched the
Yeah.
quantile model.
So then I was like, all right, let me expand on some of the work that other people have done, and some people sort of filled all these quantiles in. Like I didn't. I did create another one called the regression rainbow back then, which was already created previously, but that one's not asymmetric, right? Like there's no asymmetry here. So what I wanted to do was combine the asymmetry idea with the quantile idea, and the lower support of this. Let me just actually pull the indicator up now. Um, so the lower support is essentially equivalent to the power law, right? It's not, it's just basically the power law. And I think the power law has done a pretty good job of getting the lows. But in the way the power law is defined, it tends to be really optimistic for the highs, is the issue. And so when you notice the asymmetry, that the highs are becoming less euphoric, but the support seems to hold true, that's when you're like, all right, well, let me actually plot this out in a mathematically meaningful way. Let me make sure everything is statistically significant and then show it. So what I did was
Genius.
you have this model here that, and I'm going to remove the gold lines for a second because those are not as important initially. If you remove the gold lines, you can see that we only go below Q1, which is this lower band. We only go below it about 1% of the time, right? And so I was like, well, is there a way to quantify that? So what I did was I fit the data to the what I'm calling them as dislocations, where you go below Q1. And if you do that, we had a dislocation in August 2010, in August 2015, in March of 2020, and in the FTX crash in November of 2022. Now, if you do that, you get this golden band down here. So I would refer to this golden band as like the golden pocket. Whenever Bitcoin goes down there, it represents a massive dislocation, and it's a really good time to buy Bitcoin. There's no guarantee we go down there. When we do go down there, historically, it's been a really good time to buy. So what's interesting is that the lowest price on here is about 40K, about 40. And I think the absolute worst case scenario for this year, absolute worst case, I do not think Bitcoin would go below it, would be the 30 to 40K range. Like I think that'd be the worst case outcome for the rest of the year. And it's interesting because we've had a dislocation before that went down to about that level. So I just want people to be aware that, you know, the markets don't always have to make sense. You could look at the S&P going up and Bitcoin's going down, but you occasionally get these dislocations, and historically it just offers a fairly good entry into Bitcoin for those willing to, to be patient.
And the cool thing that I've noticed is we've basically come down to the green log band support. And like you've said, you've only spent 1% of the time below already the green log band support, which
So right now we're at the right now we're at the third percentile. So we've spent about 3% of our time in history below the current, below the current levels.
so it's a fantastic time to buy for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, normally the time to start buying Bitcoin is after the June crash in midterm years. That's when you start. You kind of
Coming
just
up.
allow the market to unwind into June, and then you just start DCAing and you forget about it, and maybe you go lower in Q4, and if you do great, you buy more, and then you call it a day.
Well, Ben, before we conclude this interview, it's not going to be a Ben Cowan interview unless we do Bitcoin dominance, of course. Now, when we look into external factors such as crude oil is at treacherously high levels. Like yourself, an elderly gentleman on Monday who's gone through the 2008 financial crisis, and he told me that in 2008 we had high inflation, we had poor labor data, and that was coupled with elevated energy prices, which then led to the 2008 financial crisis. So when we look into the energy markets today, we are elevated. We're not at $150 per barrel. So we're not there, but inflation is picking up. And even though the labor market is technically remaining resilient because people are not getting fired, but people are not getting hired either, there's like an equilibrium there. I see some potential signs to stagflation. And I'm just curious on what you think about that. Interest rates, which ultimately decides altcoin season. And then we'll get into Bitcoin dominance.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bitcoin dominance will remain elevated. I'm not expecting it to go to like a new high right now, but maybe in the next bull market, it probably will take out the high that we had last year. As far as energy prices, I think they're going to remain structurally higher for probably the rest of this year, and that'll put a lot of pressure on the Fed to not cut rates, and it's one of the reasons why the crypto markets could be arguably struggling for the rest of the year is because monetary policy is not as loose as people want it to be. And arguably, the reason a lot of these altcoins existed to begin with was because they were born in an era where money was free, right? Where interest rates were essentially zero. And now we're not at a period where interest rates are zero. And so when that happens, a lot of zombie companies die. And altcoins are the most egregious of zombie companies because they don't even pretend to be anything but a zombie company. They're just living. Uh, they go to zero first. And I know recently we've seen dominance drop a little bit. We also saw it drop after the 2019 top as well,
Yeah,
for a little while, and then eventually it went back up. So I think I don't think it makes sense to be bearish on dominance. And one of the main reasons dominance has gone down some is because stablecoin dominance has gone up. If you actually look at the valuations of like ETH Bitcoin or Solana Bitcoin or majors against Bitcoin, a lot of them have been dropping since mid 2025. So I think dominance is still something to remain bullish on, even though I don't really expect it to go to new highs right now. I think it doesn't make sense to fade it either. I think eventually it will. Like, I think it'll go. I think dominance will put in new highs before it goes much lower, if that
So,
makes
so,
sense.
so you don't think that we'll see like a 2022 where dominance did capitulate as Bitcoin went down, altcoins bled less against Bitcoin because we do have like a head and shouldersy thing. So you don't see the possibility that we do drop.
Yeah, that could happen, but I'm saying I don't think Bitcoin's gonna go. I don't think Bitcoin dominance is gonna drop back to like 40% and
Okay.
coincide with an alt season anytime soon.
Okay.
You
Makes
could
sense.
see dominance remain in sort of the mid to upper 50s. Probably will bounce back above 60 at some point. I don't think it's durably going anywhere until probably like later this year, early next year, and then you might start to see real movements with it.
In our last interview as well, by the way, we were talking about Ethereum Bitcoin, which you brought up a lot, and you highlighted the 0.01772. Because we couldn't break above this trend line, do you see? I mean, I personally think we will revisit it.
I don't know if it'll go that low. I mean, it could be a higher low, kind of like what it did last cycle. If it takes out the 2019 low, it would be really hard to be a bull on Ethereum because then it just looks like a bleeder, against Bitcoin, which it probably is long term anyways. But if you wanted to remain bullish on it for another cycle or two, you really want to see it print a higher low against Bitcoin, not a lower low. And so, I think ETH is going to bleed against Bitcoin for a little bit longer, but perhaps in a few months you'll see it print like a macro higher low or double bottom or something. If it goes lower, then it'll just play out like all the other altcoins.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on, guys. Everything aside, I can't stress this enough. Like Ben is one of my heroes, and it's such an incredible thing to have Ben. Like apart from being friends with him, which I mean, we have like a weird sort of relationship where he's like my uncle and I'm the nephew, but um, or sometimes I'm his like sixth child. I don't know. It's a bit strange, but apart from that, I'm very grateful to have Ben on. So thank you so much for joining. It really means the world to me. You may have broken my heart a couple of times, telling me things that are apparently not real. So I started to read as bedtime stories your reports on benjamincohen.com. And it helps me kill the anxiety which you gave me at points, and also puts me fast asleep. So if you want to check out these reports and fall asleep faster, whilst also being informed and entertained, then go to code.com.
Well,
and
thanks
with
for having
and with that, thank you all so much, and see you all soon. Bye bye. Dude, like honestly, last night I slept at 2 a.m., but then I set an alarm for 4 because that's when Bitcoin dumps. So I'm gonna go to bed now, dude. It's
All right, now I think you need to, yeah, you need to go. We need to end the call, go brush your teeth, and go to bed.
unbelievable.